Mill, which was kind of around there. The ring road all goes through that now. And Christie Lynch and Abbey Road started up in Perry's Yard on Abbey Road in 1949. So the 1950s, there's not a lot happening in terms of expansion, but the four big factories are there: Walsh, Hogg, Moore Brothers and Navan Joinery, and they're now employing 400 people between them. There's a lot of austerity, mass immigration, recession, all that kind of stuff going on in the 1950s. Industrial strife was certainly another problem. In 1951 there was a big strike that went on for 3 months in Bard Walsh's factory over pay. A lot of guys actually left Navan around that time. And some of them came back, some of them went away. They went to places like Belfast, Monaghan and Waterford, some went to the UK. As soon as the strike was over, a lot of them came back, some of them didn't. Other small-scale operations started around that time. Navan Cabinet and Chairworks, which was Frank Gearan. Frank was a woodwork teacher in the technical school in Navan. And Navan Steel Products, Frank Murray, began making tubular steel furniture at a factory on Trim Road in and around the early 50s as well. Oops. Okay, let's talk about Bard. Born in 1895 to a baker from County Kilkenny. Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't a native of Navan. He was born in Kilcock. But by 1901, he was living with his maternal grandmother, Matilda Leach, at Flower Hill, Paul Boy actually, which was the old name for Paul Boy Street at the bottom of Flower Hill. He worked like his brothers as a general labourer, earning a shilling a week, as he recalled himself later on. When he asked for a raise, he was told no. So this was around 1914, so he went to Northern Ireland and he enlisted in the British Army for a better wage. Joined the Leinster Regiment in World War I, saw action at Ypres and the Somme. After demobilisation, came home, and at some point later on, he got a job in Aylesbury's factory and trained as a chairmaker. And he then went on to, in 1928 or so, he went on to form his own business, having trained in Aylesbury's. As many of you know, he earned his nicknames through his singing voice. He was a prolific singer. His party piece was The Bard of Armagh, made famous by John McCormack. He had other pieces in his repertoire as well. The Trumpeter and Jerusalem were other ones. But here he is in full flow, bottom left. But I've included the Christmas card that he sent from the Western Front to the love of his life, Ellen Cattle from O'Grady Terrace, or Nellie as he called her. It's kind of curious when you see to Nellie, not from William or Willie or Billy, but from Bard. So he actually, normally you have nicknames conferred on you, but he actually seemed to embrace the nickname himself. He certainly would never call him Bard to his face. He was always Mr. Walsh. But it is curious that he kind of seemed to adopt the nickname himself. He also devoted 30 years of his life to public service. He was a councillor, first elected to Navan Urban District Council in 1928 as an independent Labour member. I was elected to Meath County Council later and was actually chairman of Meath County Council for a number of years in the 1950s. He had a fearsome reputation as a tough employer, and he didn't suffer fools. I'm wondering if his reputation, if we go back to bullet point 2, was possibly forged in the terror and the horror of the trenches in World War I. Not too many men came back from the Great War unscathed, either physically or mentally from that war. So that might explain why he was such a tough nut. But I've also discovered a more mellow side to him, a kinder side to him as well. It's explored in the book. So he wasn't all bad, but he was certainly the titan of the furniture industry in Navan. He had the biggest factory, the biggest workforce, the biggest orders, and I think without him, the furniture industry in Navan would certainly not look the same today if he wasn't part of it. Okay, so why did Navan become a furniture town? I've identified 4 reasons. There was an abundance of hardwood forests on the local estates like Black Castle, places like the Hill of Slane, the Hill of Tara, and these extensive woodlands fed the thriving industry that was happening in Navan. There was a tradition of sawmilling in general in the area as well. Navan, Brownstown, Balrath, Bective, there were sawmills everywhere, including obviously Elliott's in Navan as well. Probably the most important factor was there was a large pool of skilled labour in the town, particularly after Aylesbury's burnt out. You can have all the timber that you want in the world, but without the skilled hands to fashion it into furniture, you're nowhere. Navan's close proximity to Dublin, the biggest market in the country, was also a major factor. You had all the large furniture houses, Cavendish, Lees, Switzers, Clowry's, Arnott's, they were all there. And Navan was at most an hour away from Dublin. So in the early 1960s, things started to happen. The 4 large factories spawned a new generation of industrialists. And all these guys had served their time in the factories and were anxious to get out on their own and make their names for themselves. So we've got people like, say, Frank Nelson on the top left, Tommy Foster in the middle on top, and his brother George, the large picture, and Mick Maguna, top right. They all started out in small sheds at the back of their homes. Frank Nelson started out at the back of Academy Street, having served his time in Bards and Navan Joinery for a very short time, and then in Balmoral. Tommy Foster and George started up at the back of their mother's house in Emma Terrace. Then they moved to a rented yard at the back of Gibney's, the Nook on Bruce Hill, and they also used Muldoon's yard down at the bottom of Watergate Street. Mick Maguna started out in Mill Lane, having learned his trade in Morans and a few other places. So in the 60s, as I say, a lot of things happened. Bart Walsh hands over Boyne Mills to his son Raphael, and he leaves Navan. He went to live in Leytown first and then ended up in Dublin. And Balmoral Furniture establishes a factory in Navan, with a factory on the Kells Road. They were a big outfit from Dunmurry and Belfast, owned by the Moffat family. And they had been looking for an opportunity to establish a base in the Republic of Ireland, and Navan was the obvious choice. So they bought the factory of Jody Clark on Ludlow Street initially, were based there for a short time, and then they moved out to part of Clayton's Woolen Mills on the Kells Road, where they were there for the next large number of years. So Cranach, 1957, John Hogg is in financial difficulties due to a combination of lack of management skills and shortcomings in relation to design costings and different things. Joshua Elliott, who we mentioned earlier, the sawmiller, had become a sleeping partner in the business on a 50% basis earlier in the 50s, and he was becoming increasingly concerned about his investment. So his son Wilfred, who had been in his father's business, 24 volunteers to join John Hogg as an assistant to try and safeguard the Elliott family's interest in the business. And that was a masterstroke. Elliott transforms the business and turns it around. He introduces elementary cost controls, ditches unprofitable lines, all that kind of stuff. Eventually takes up some unissued share capital and buys out John Hogg. Now John Hogg stayed on as the sales rep for the company for a while before he left and started his own business again, JH Products. So Elliott introduces new design ideas. He hires a UK designer called Arthur Edwards, who was the designer for G-Plan in High Wycombe, and also for White and Newton in Portsmouth, who were a trend-setting furniture design company on the south coast of the UK. Later on, a guy called Valentino Rossi, who was a Scot who sounds Italian, took over and developed those designs further. But out of that came the designs like the Model A, the Model B, and the Model C chair, which were launched to great acclaim in a press conference in Dublin in 1962. They had also sourced a new type of wood called Aformosia, which was a cheaper alternative to teak. They found that in the forests of Ghana, and it became the wood that they used mostly. Crannock furniture becomes a major sales success, both in Ireland and the UK. And in fact, now Crannock, or John Hogg at that stage, was the largest, or the lead, not the largest, but the leading, described as the leading furniture manufacturer in the country at that stage. But all that rapid growth necessitated more investment, and Wilfred Elliott went on the road trying to woo new investors, and he convinces Gaylin that the craft skills that were evident in John Hogg and Company perfectly aligned with their idea of Irish identity. So they came on board, took a majority stake. Wilfred retained a minority stake, but he more or less took a back seat from that point on. The name has changed from Hogg and Company to Crannock Choranton. And throughout this period of the sort of mid to late 60s, it's somewhat less successful time for Crannock. Gaylin eventually offloads its stake to the McElroy brothers of Delaney, County Monaghan, in 1971. And a year later, to the shock of the workforce, the company goes into liquidation. There's, huge anger among the workers, huge support for the workers, in fact, in Navan. They began 4 to 5 week sitting. And when they announced their intention to form a workers' cooperative to try and buy back the factory, there's huge support for them in Navan, and a large fundraising campaign gets underway, fronted by people like Father Andy Farrell, who was a curate in Navan at the time, and people like Michael Woods, who was the manager of St Mary's Credit Union, and lots of others as well. People of Navan put their money in their pockets, buy shares in the company, and eventually the workers managed to raise sufficient cash to put in a bid on the factory, £49,000, which is accepted by the liquidator. They buy back the factory, form a workers' co-op, and reopen. Initially selling to all their old retail outlets, then they